E na mana, e na reo, e na kaurangatanga maha, tēnā koutou. Ne te mihi kina ki te mana whenua, kotu o suva vo, tēnā koutou. Ne te mihi ki te rangatira, tēnā koutou. Ke te mihi ki a koe whaia, ko nei whailu thaman, ko nei heilu thaman, aroho mai. Ana hoki hi mea nui mātua, Derek Armstrong. Ke te mihi ki a koe whaia, Akanizi Kanzariate. Kia ora koe whaia and Cheryl Armstrong. Ko Tamaki Makaro. Whoops. Aho. Toku wahi mahi, ko te whare wananga o Tamaki Makara, ko Missy Morton, e tuna mei. Nisa Yadra, kia orana, talofa lava, kia ora, namaste. I began by greeting all the authorities, all the voices, all the many alliances and affiliations who are present here. There's 3 images on my slide. There are 3 images on my slide. One shows a waka, a canoe. So on the slide are significant elements of being from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aotearoa is bicultural, and I humbly offer my mihi in te reo as a beginner. The language brought to Aotearoa by the ancient tribes and iwis of that place. The second image is Aoraki, the cloud piercer, a significant mountain in Te Waiponemu, the South Island, where I've lived most of my life in New Zealand. But the way I say my R's comes from Southern California. The third image is a beautiful beach, Piha. It's where the Pacific touches the west of Auckland, which is where I live now. And I work at the University of Auckland, where I'm a professor of disability studies and education. And lastly, I say, this is Missy Morton, who stands before you. Have the next slide. Yep. There are a lot of words on this slide, and I apologize. But the 2 main things to take away from this are things that we have in New Zealand that I think are significant for what we've been able to achieve in inclusive education. The first is that we have a socio-cultural perspective on curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And the second is that we have very strong, culturally responsive pedagogies, and the one I'll talk a little bit about today comes from my colleagues Angus and Sonia McFarlane, who are from Te Arawa and Kaitahu, respectively. So most of my work has been around assessment and challenging the forms of assessment that really just focus on diagnosis, that really just focus on putting labels on kids. And these are the kinds of labels, as Umesh has alluded to, that can actually scare us. They don't need to scare us, but it's too much information sometimes, and it doesn't always tell us what to do. So when students get introduced to teachers, first by their labels, teachers have been really puzzled about how curriculum is relevant for them, about how assessment is relevant for them. So we've had 3 starting points in our projects about assessment. The first is that assessment is mostly about getting to know a person. Assessment comes from aseder, literally meaning to sit beside someone. So one question has to be, what forms of assessment really support us to get to know our students instead of putting a barrier between us and our students? The second starting point is that most learning happens outside the classroom. Learning is something that happens mostly outside the classroom. So, what forms of assessment support us to get to know about that learning? And who is going to be able to tell us about that learning? The third point is learning is much more than what happens just inside one person's head. Learning is always something that happens in interaction with other people and contexts. So these lead to our last questions. What forms of assessment really help us to know about the contexts where that learning happens? And who is going to be able to tell us about those contexts for learning? So these are the understandings, social cultural perspectives that are explicit in our early childhood curriculum, te whāriki, which literally means to weave, and in certain parts of our New Zealand curriculum. So we started a project working with teachers around New Zealand in primary and secondary schools on a form of assessment that's called narrative assessment. In early childhood, we have learning stories, stories of learning from everywhere and from everyone, and we started doing the same thing in the compulsory sector called narrative assessment. And there's a link on that slide. And Cheryl, are we going to make these PowerPoints available to people? Yeah. So if you write to N. Cheryl. Yeah. And the link is called Through Different Eyes. And the reason it's called Through Different Eyes is that when we worked with teachers, they kept saying, when we tell stories about learning, we're seeing our students through different eyes, and we see ourselves through different eyes. It's really hard to see yourself as a teacher if you can't see the person in front of you as a learner. You wonder why they are there in your classroom. I also talked about culturally responsive pedagogies, and on this slide are 4 key principles from what's called the Educultural Wheel by Angus and Sonia McFarland. So I'll just quickly read them out to you. Whanaungatonga, for me, is one of the most important things. It's about building relationships. You can't be an effective teacher or an effective learner if there aren't relationships at the center of everything that you do. Manakitanga is about an ethic of care, but the first part of that word is mana. I'm not sure what the English translation would be. It's something about respect and dignity and recognizing the inherent mana in every person and everything. And the way that we act has to be about taking care of that mana. Rangatiratanga is about teaching effectiveness, about exuding confidence so that your students know that you're a person to be trusted, but that's not about being authoritarian. It's about leadership rather than authority. And the last one is kotahitanga, which is about an ethic of bonding. And some of you may have heard about the Te Kotahitanga project that comes out of Waikato University, which is around Māori succeeding as Māori. You don't have to leave your culture at the door in order to succeed at school. May I have the next slide? So why do I think these have been effective for us in New Zealand? Theories of learning determine how we act towards people. The way we think about learning sets the scene for who we think can learn and who we are in relationship to that person. As I said before, if you don't see the person in front of you as a learner, you're wondering why they're in your classroom. And if you don't see them as a learner, you might not see yourself as a teacher. That's a pretty big challenge to your identity. So if we can come up with forms of assessment that support seeing everybody as a learner, it's easier to see yourself as a teacher and to want those people in your classroom. We've learned a lot about the power of stories. The power of stories to make connections with families, with children and young people, with their students, with their teachers, and with their communities. Stories help people connect. Stories help people believe. Ako is a Māori concept around learning and teaching. As a teacher, also something as Umesh said, as a teacher, you are always also a learner. And assessment should be telling us as teachers what we need to learn about, what we need to do next. The last bullet point is a group called the Inclusive Education Action Group that's now in its 10th year. This group is an alliance of disabled people, their families and whānau, their teachers, researchers, teacher educators, policymakers. They keep us grounded. They make sure that we speak truth to power, that we're always informed by the lived experiences of disabled people and their families. So this proverb or whakatoki I've put up here is nao te roro, naku te roro, ka ora ai te iwi. With your food basket and my food basket, together we will feed the people. This is about collaboration. Last slide. Right, so this one is, he a te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. If you ask me what is the most important thing in the world, I will say to you, it is people, it is people, it is people. And in inclusive education, I think this means trust children and young people, trust their families, trust their teachers. I've learned how important it is to always respect a person's mana, that through every encounter, all mana should be enhanced, that people should never come away feeling their mana has been trampled or diminished. If you trample the mana of a child, you diminish the mana of that family. You trample the mana of that hapu and that iwi. Trust children, young people, and their families to have some very good ideas about what will support them. Good ideas about how they can learn, what they need to learn, what their dream is for their present, their dreams for the future. Mostly, these dreams will be the same dreams that everybody has. We trust that teachers have their students' best interests at heart. Trust that teachers want to learn how to be the best teachers that they can be. And when we support teachers to recognize all children as learners, teachers feel more confident in their relationships with students. Trust needs relationships. Trust builds relationships. You need trust when you're working through challenging and difficult times, when working through significant changes together. Trust and relationships are strengthened through respect and through mana. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.